There is a strange lie that keeps repeating itself. That Africans did not know God until someone else arrived with a book and told them his name. That the Igbo people were spiritually empty until Christianity filled the space. But that story collapses the moment you ask a better question. Not when did the Igbo meet God, but why did outsiders struggle to understand the God the Igbo already knew? Because Chukwu was never missing. Chukwu was too big to translate. The name Chukwu comes from two ideas fused together. Chi, personal spiritual essence, destiny, divine spark. Okwu, greatness, vastness, immensity. So Chukwu is not a person in the sky. Chukwu is the great source of all chi. Not approachable like a king, not negotiable like a spirit, not jealous like a god who competes. Chukwu is the totality. And here is where Western theology immediately gets uncomfortable. Because the Igbo did not describe God as personal first. They described God as cosmic.
Observation. In Igbo cosmology, Chukwu does not require worship rituals to maintain authority. This indicates a theological structure where divinity is ontological, not relational. Chukwu exists because existence exists. There's no origin story because Chukwu is origin. There's no image because Chukwu exceeds representation. Conclusion: this is not primitive theology. This is advanced metaphysics.
Exactly. And this is where early European missionaries made their first mistake. They looked for idols, temples, sacrifices, statues, centralized priesthood. And when they didn't find them for Chukwu, they assumed absence. But absence of representation is not absence of belief. It's a refusal to reduce the infinite. In Igbo thought, Chukwu is too vast to be interacted with directly, so the spiritual system functions like this. Chukwu, supreme, unknowable source. Allah, moral order, earth, justice. Alusi, forces of nature and principle. Ancestors, continuity of wisdom. Chi, individual destiny link. This is not polytheism. This is distributed theology. One source, many expressions.
So basically, they weren't worshiping many gods. They were saying one source, many responsibilities, which honestly sounds more organized than most modern systems.
Exactly, Milo. And here's the part that history quietly skips. When missionaries translated God into Igbo, they didn't invent a new word. They used Chukwu, not because it was convenient, but because there was no higher concept available. That alone tells you something. Now let's anchor this in records, not just oral memory. Early colonial writings, missionary journals, and linguistic studies repeatedly note something unusual about Igbo belief. They observed that the Igbo already believed in a supreme being. This being was not represented physically. Moral law was believed to come from divine order, not rulers, and the supreme being was not appeased with offerings. This is documented in early British ethnographic notes, missionary correspondences, and colonial administrative records. They struggled to classify it because it didn't match European religious categories. So they simplified it. And simplification is the first step toward erasure.
Data pattern identified. When a belief system does not resemble Western religious hierarchy, it is often labeled primitive, animist, pagan, despite demonstrating philosophical depth. This is a classification error.
Yes, and that error had consequences. Once Chukwu was reframed as distant, vague, incomplete, Christianity positioned itself as a replacement instead of an overlay. But historically, Christianity didn't replace Chukwu, it renamed him. This is why many Igbo elders never experienced a contradiction. They didn't feel like they abandoned God. They felt like they learned a new story about the same source. The conflict came later, when theology became weaponized, when hierarchy replaced balance, when intermediaries claimed authority over destiny.
So, Chukwu wasn't hidden. He was quiet.
Not even quiet. Chukwu was assumed, so fundamental that no one felt the need to explain him. You don't explain the sky to people who live under it. Before Christianity, before colonization, before English, the Igbo already believed the universe had intelligence. They just didn't think it needed a throne. Western theology is obsessed with one question: who tells people right from wrong? For the Igbo, the answer wasn't a book. It wasn't a king. It wasn't a priest. It was Allah. And no, Allah was not just an earth goddess. That translation is lazy. Allah was moral reality itself. Allah governed truth, justice, contracts, fertility, crime, taboo, community balance. If Chukwu was the source of being, Allah was the rules of existence. You didn't sin against Allah. You violated order.
Legal comparison detected. In Igbo society, there was no separation between law, ethics, and spirituality. Moral violation produced social and ecological consequences. Justice was restorative, not punitive. This resembles a constitutional system, not a religious one.
Exactly. Allah was why you could not spill innocent blood, break sacred oaths, violate land boundaries, disrespect communal trust. Not because a god would strike you, but because reality would respond. The land would remember. This is why land mattered so deeply to the Igbo. Land wasn't property. Land was archive. Every birth, every burial, every promise, every crime recorded.
So, lying wasn't just immoral, it was destabilizing the universe a little. No pressure or anything.
Exactly. And this is where colonial observers got uncomfortable. Because there was no centralized judge, no police force, no prisons. Yet communities functioned. Why? Because accountability was collective, and the ultimate witness wasn't human. British colonial records repeatedly complained that Igbo societies were acephalous, meaning headless. No king, no throne, no crown. They mistook distributed authority for disorder, but Allah was the authority.
Historical pattern. Colonial systems require hierarchy to function efficiently. Societies without centralized power appear chaotic to outsiders, even when internally stable. Misinterpretation confirmed.
Now here's something critical. Christianity arrived with a legal structure that said, God makes the law. Priests interpret the law. The church enforces the law. But the Igbo system said, Chukwu is, Allah orders, the community restores. That's not paganism, that's philosophy. And this is where fracture began. When colonial rule criminalized practices tied to Allah, land rituals, oath systems, restorative justice, ancestral accountability, they didn't just change religion, they dismantled moral infrastructure.
So, people didn't suddenly lose values. The operating system got overwritten.
Yes. And without Allah anchoring daily ethics, morality became external, something enforced, not lived. Chukwu did not disappear, but the bridge between the cosmic and the everyday was damaged. And when morality is no longer rooted in lived reality, people start asking someone else to tell them how to be human. There's a phrase in Igbo that carries more philosophy than entire textbooks. Onye kwe, chi ya ekwe. Roughly translated, people say, if you agree, your chi agrees. But that translation barely scratches it, because chi is not luck. Chi is not fate. Chi is not a guardian angel. Chi is your personal allocation of divine force. Every person is born with a body, a lineage, a destiny trajectory, and a chi. Chi is how Chukwu becomes specific, not distant, not abstract, personal.
Conceptual mapping. Chukwu equals universal source. Chi equals individualized expression of source. This is consistent with modern models of consciousness, self-regulation, agency, internal locus of control. Conclusion. Igbo cosmology embeds personal responsibility at the spiritual level.
Yes, which means the Igbo never believed humans were powerless. Your chi wasn't there to control you. Your chi was there to collaborate with you. This is why success was never accidental. If someone prospered, people said, his chi is strong, not meaning lucky, meaning aligned. And when someone failed repeatedly, they didn't say, God hates him. They asked, is he fighting his chi? That question alone dismantles the idea that Africans believed in blind destiny, because chi could be resisted, ignored, misused, disrespected.
So, chi is like that inner voice that keeps saying, this ain't you, and you keep doing it anyway. And then life starts pushing back.
Exactly. Chi explains why two people can come from the same family, same land, same upbringing, and live completely different lives. Because destiny isn't fixed, it's negotiated. Now here's where colonial misunderstanding did real damage. Missionaries often translated chi as personal god, guardian spirit, or worse, lesser deity. That flattened the concept. Because chi was never worshipped instead of Chukwu. Chi was how Chukwu trusted humans with agency.
Critical distinction. In many Western theologies, God commands, humans obey. In Igbo theology, Chukwu provides essence, chi collaborates, humans act. Agency is sacred.
Which means responsibility was sacred too. You couldn't blame everything on fate. If your life collapsed, elders might say, go and reconcile with your chi. That meant reflection, correction, realignment, not prayer alone. This is why colonial Christianity clashed so hard with chi, because Christianity centralized authority outside the self. Confession replaced alignment. Obedience replaced agency. Salvation replaced responsibility. And slowly, people were taught to distrust their inner knowing.
So, instead of asking, what did I ignore? People were taught to ask, who do I pray to fix this?
Yes. And that shift didn't just change religion, it changed psychology. In Igbo thought, Chukwu trusted humans enough to give them chi, not to dominate them, but to walk with them. And any system that teaches you to fear your own agency has misunderstood the God who gave it to you. Christianity did not arrive in Igbo land as an empty cup meeting living water. It arrived as a bureaucratic system meeting an existing cosmology. And instead of saying, you already know God, it said, you know God incorrectly. That distinction matters. Early missionaries documented something surprising. They wrote that the Igbo believed in one supreme God, believed morality came from divine order, believed humans had spiritual agency, believed ancestors mattered. So they made a strategic decision. They did not erase Chukwu, they rebranded him.
Translation analysis. The Christian God was rendered as Chukwu in Igbo Bibles. This indicates semantic equivalence was assumed. However, functional theology differed significantly. Result: same name, different operating system.
Exactly. On paper, it looked seamless, but in practice, critical shifts occurred. Let's name them. Shift 1. Authority moved outward. Before, moral authority lived in Ella, agency lived in Chi. After, authority lived in clergy, morality lived in scripture. People were taught to consult outward before inward.
So, instead of asking, is this aligned with who I am? They were taught to ask, is this allowed?
Yes, and that changes behavior at scale. Shift 2. Community justice became institutional law. Colonial administration labeled Igbo systems as informal, unreliable, uncivilized. So British courts replaced Allah-based justice. Oaths lost spiritual weight. Restorative practices were criminalized. Prisons replaced reconciliation. This wasn't spiritual reform. It was legal restructuring.
Historical documentation confirms British colonial ordinances explicitly dismantled indigenous legal authority. This created moral dependency on external enforcement.
And then came the deepest shift. Shift 3. Time was severed. Christian theology emphasized linear salvation, future heaven, individual afterlife. Igbo cosmology emphasized cyclical time, ancestral continuity, living memory. When ancestors were reframed as dead instead of present, people lost access to historical grounding.
So wisdom stopped flowing backward. Everything had to come from the front.
Yes. Now, let's be honest. Christianity also brought literacy, global connection, education, political leverage. This is why many Igbo embraced it willingly. It wasn't blind conversion. It was adaptive survival. But adaptation became replacement over time, especially when colonial power punished spiritual continuity. People weren't choosing between gods. They were choosing between safety and criminalization.
System conclusion. Religious adoption under coercive governance cannot be classified as pure belief shift. It is a structural negotiation.
This is why today, many Igbo Christians still say things like, "My chi knows," "Allah forbid," "Let the land judge," even inside church walls, because Chukwu was never erased, only reframed. Christianity did not introduce God to the Igbo. It introduced control over God language. And that difference echoes still. Here's the mistake people keep making. They think remembering Chukwu means going backward, rejecting Christianity, rejecting science, rejecting modern life. That's not remembrance. That's reaction. The Igbo way was never about rejection. It was about balance. Chukwu does not compete. That's the key. Chukwu was never threatened by new languages, new religions, new ideas, because Chukwu was never fragile. What was fragile were systems of control.
Reintegration model. Chukwu equals ultimate source. Faith traditions equals interpretive lenses. Science equals observation of order. Psychology equals human interface. Conflict only arises when one layer claims total authority.
Exactly. Remembering Chukwu doesn't mean replacing one doctrine with another. It means restoring spiritual literacy, knowing what existed before it was simplified. Here's what remembering looks like in practice. Not rituals, not costumes, but orientation. You trust your inner moral compass again. You understand destiny as collaboration, not punishment. You see land, body, and community as interconnected. You stop outsourcing your humanity. That's Chukwu.
So, remembering Chukwu isn't about saying, I don't believe in anything else. It's about saying, I know where my knowing comes from.
Yes, and that changes how you move through the world. Because if Chukwu is vast and non-jealous, then fear-based faith makes no sense. This is why elders used to say, live well, the rest aligns. Not believe harder, not submit more, live well. That was worship.
Ethical conclusion. When morality is internalized rather than enforced, compliance becomes character.
And that's the danger of forgetting Chukwu. People become obedient, but not ethical. Religious, but not grounded. Spiritual, but disconnected from land, body, and responsibility. Chukwu was never hiding. Chukwu was assumed. And what is assumed is easy to forget when someone convinces you it was missing. But the source didn't disappear. It waited.